Welcome to Living It with Chris Waddell. I am here with my good buddy, Scot Hollonbeck. Scott and I raced wheelchairs together. He is a 5-time Paralympic medalist. In addition to being a medalist, he was actually really the leader of the U.S. contingent of wheelchair racers during our era. So somebody who created a great foundation. Can you tell me about the 800 meter in Barcelona in 1992?
That was my first Paralympic Games, and I wasn't what to expect, what that was going to be like. And it was, would there be people in the stands? Would anybody care? And it was just off the hook. I remember coming out that day, and I think it was like a 60. Was it a 50,000? Maybe it was 50,000 person stadium, right in that range. And when we come out, there was maybe 45,000 people there. So you're like, whoa. And of course, when you are at a Olympic or a Paralympic venue, you're underneath the stadium for your event, and so as they're cheering for other crowds, like you're like literally dust is coming off the ceiling. It's a bit like that
when you're staging for that event.
Yeah, when you're staging. Sorry, yeah, like before your event, you're staged underneath, and it's a bit like that scene in Gladiator where there's really bright light up there, and you're in this dark underbelly of this stadium. So out we're rolling. These were guys that we'd raced against for years and had to qualify against, and here we are at the final, and we roll out, and your eyes are adjusting, and then there's like 45,000 people, and the Queen and King of Spain and all these dignitaries, and there's actually like television crews there everywhere. So it was the real deal. And
how many people are you used to competing in front of prior to this?
So when we raced on the road, like at a Boston Marathon or a Chicago Marathon or a Peachtree Road Race, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of fans, but that's different than when they're all inside one stadium. So that was I think the biggest group, hands down the biggest group. Well, I shouldn't say that, because there was the Olympic Games before that, a month before, and we can get into that story. There was for many, I guess it was 6 Olympic Games from 84 to 2004. There was a 1,500 meter wheelchair exhibition event for the men, straight final. You had to qualify, only the final. And then an 800 meter for the women. So I had raced in that stadium a month before in the Olympics in the 1,500. There were more people in the stand that day for that 800 meter than there were when I did it for the Olympics. So I was like, wow, I guess time to readjust what I thought the Paralympics were about. So, or what sort of their status as becoming a major world event. And Jeff Adams and I, that was a Canadian Jeff Adams that was there. There was Claude Iserat was in that race, who was a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. Like I think he did like at that point 7 or 8 gold medals in the Paralympics. He still is an amazing athlete. And so I knew I'm just a farm kid from Illinois. Like, these guys are like, when I look at them on paper, my own father used to say, like, I got to give it to you, son. You've come a long way, but I got to say, I'm going to bet against you in this race because there's just better horses. Right? So, and that's fine. That's what I loved about wheelchair racing and track racing in particular. It's a mobile chess game, right? Like, it's not just got the fastest sprint or the best surge or the best start so they can get position. It's not who's the best tactician out there. It's not who gets boxed or makes sure they never get boxed in, just like in NASCAR racing or, on the track. I was like kind of good at a lot of them, but I wasn't the best at any of them. And I knew that Jeff Adams and Claude Iserat would kill me in a sprint. And I knew I had tried at that point.
And Mustafa was in that too, right? So
yeah, he was. I'm sorry, I left out Mustafa. Saul Mendoza was in that race. Like, there was a bunch of people in that race, right? And
it was a who's who, yes.
It was a big race. Anybody in that race honestly could have won that race. They really could have on a different day. And because we'd seen each other at world championships and other major world events, like different people had won. Jeff and I swapped the world record in the semi and the prelim qualifying rounds twice. So I was kind of thinking this is going to be Jeff, Claude, anybody else if we make a mistake. And
Cisco
realized,
was there too. Cisco Jeter.
Yeah, he was there.
From the US, who was like an Adonis. I remember seeing Cisco for the first time thinking, wow, like how can anybody be faster than this guy?
Well, I knew he was done before he ever got there because he was so good looking and he was like so like this like physical specimen that they make sculptures out of. So he had like 10,000 Spanish girls that were trying to get his attention. So I was like, he's done. So
but you were as prepared as you've ever been for a games, I'm assuming, for 92, because you were at the U of I at that point, right?
Certainly up until that point. Yeah, I had tried out in 88 with everything that I had at that point in my life, given 8 years of my life to get to that event. And that didn't include being an able-bodied athlete because I've been running and competing since I was like in the womb with my identifier. So time that I broke my back until then, that was 8 years. And I saw the women's 800 meter wheelchair race while I was laying in the hospital 3 days after breaking my back. I hadn't even sat up. Just
this
got out
is
of
the demonstration event, right? From 84 from LA.
Saw that event. And I don't know what the chances of that were because it had never been filmed. It had never been done. But that event, I was laying there and I looked over at my mom and I was like, I think I want to try that. Of course, my parents were like, oh yeah, you're going to go to the Olympics. You'll be a champion. But it really, that's where it started for me. And I dove in and I was so blessed to be living in Illinois and get exposed to the University of Illinois program, which had at that point, hands down, the best coaching and system in the world and still arguably does have that. It certainly for somebody who's going through university or college. So yeah, I got in there. Like I was going there when I was 15 to their summer camps, and Marty Morris, who was my coach and dear friend to this day, he was writing me workouts and guiding me the whole time. And then when I got there, I got 4 years underneath him as a coach. And I was on my A game. I was still a little young. That's the only reason I'm not saying it was the best I was ever prepared, because until you go into those environments with that, just all of it, right?
The experience, knowing that you can be there.
Yeah. I didn't have 10 years later in 2004, I had 10 more years of racing experience. So I think that got better. The only problem was my body was falling apart. So literally.
It's a sweet spot thing. Yeah. So Marty also, like he brought you guys in training prior to going to Barcelona. He brought you through like all the scenarios, like brought you guys to the line and then backed off, had all these had these delays and just played with your minds, right?
He was so ahead of his time in sports psychology and preparing for the unknown. And then secondly, like we watched hundreds of hours of any film we could get our hands on of all these other athletes. I mean, we studied them. We actually had notebooks and we ranked all their different skills and how we thought they would run the race. I mean, yeah, we were ready for that race. And Marty's said to me, I think you need to go from the gun all the way. And that's hard in an 800, right? Like sprint, like everybody's going to go into oxygen debt. Everybody's going to go into maximal lactic acid threshold and beyond. And he's like, I think that's what you need to do, right? You can't beat these guys in the finish. You can't outsurge them in a 2-lap race. You have to throw like 10 surges on people that are that fit and that prepared. You can do that in a marathon. You can do it in a 5,000. You can't do it in a and so that's what we decided to do. And I had tried that a number of times in the 800, but going door to door, we call it door to door, usually you tank. as you know, right? Like you've done a lot.
Last 100 meters, you say goodbye to everybody as they
Yeah,
pass you.
You end up being dead last because you're done. You hit essentially the wall of a short race like that. So
and you were in lane 1, right?
Yeah, and that was by design. I did everything I could do in the semifinal to get the time and get the place to get lane 1. I knew I wanted lane 1 because I knew Jeff Adams or Claude or likely Mustafa, if they got lane 1, they were going to go out and they were just going to then slow it down and just create a track. So I was like, no, we're going. And that's what I did. I went off like it was 100-meter. People got in, and then they were all kind of waiting for me to pull over, slow down, whatever. And what that does is if you're in the back, or if you're boxed, the back of the pack, and all of a sudden there's not this moment where the race slows down and you can reshuffle and get into a new position, you're really in bad shape. So it forced in the back to go and race in lane 2, 3, and 4, all those big contenders, and they just didn't have enough space. And so that's what it was. I remember coming around on the first lap. I'm feeling it. And we just went into the training we done for that. We had gone.
What did you do for a lap? Do you remember what you did that first lap?
Oh, man. Okay, so that was the time that wheelchairs broke Coe's world record as a runner. So it was the first time that a wheeler went faster than the best runner in the world for that distance. And
that was Seb Coe who did that, who had set that record. Yeah,
Seb Coe had done it. Yeah, so from the UK. So I want to say, Chris, it was I believe it was 146 was the time.
140. You went 140.63.
140.63. That was it. Yeah. So I think we did the first lap in like maybe a 55, which back then a 52 to a 54 was a decent 400 at that point.
Right.
And then the last lap was, I remember it was a negative split. So whatever the difference would have been there. So if we went
55, 45.
The other, we must have done maybe like a 50. It was a 45. It was. I remember that.
So you went 45.
We did a 4. And then I managed to pull another 45 in the 4x4 later on in the games. But that's a rolling start, so it's a little different.
But 45, so that means you're averaging 20 miles an hour for that last lap. So how did it? So you said, okay, this is it. I'm going from the start. You did a 55. I'm either going
to end up dead last, totally blow up, or I'm going to win this race. And so we come around at the bell. And I can't remember. I could feel some people trying to make a move, and I was just pushing it, And
so Cisco was directly behind you.
Yeah, and I wanted him there because I thought, no offense, Cisco, but I didn't consider him one of the strongest guys. So you want a slower guy behind you. So Jeff had done it right, because then what they have to do is go around 2 guys.
So that's 12 feet that they have to make up on you,
and go around in lane 2.
Which adds more feet.
6 more feet. So I was like, that ought to be enough. Not get smart and finish. And that's kind of how it rolled out. Jeff Adams came up, which then forced Claude to go out into 3. So now he just added 6 or 7 more feet. And yeah, I ended up making it by like literally that, like an inch. And then if it would have been another foot, Jeff would have passed me, and probably if it would have been another 3 feet, 2 or 3 others would have passed me. So, yeah, I was pretty jazzed with that. I was very happy with that race, and yeah, arguably it was one of the best races of my career. So yeah, it was.
Is that when you look at this, because you raced a lot on the track, and every day training at the U of I was kind of like racing as well, right? Yeah. You had such a talented group of people who were there. So tactically, I mean, you guys were working tactics every day. It got so ingrained.
Yeah.
And is that a perfect race? Do you have the idea of what is a perfect race? How would you, because I would imagine you've dreamed this in your mind of like, how do you do it?
So I only focused on 2 races in those games, the 8 and the 15. And I was hoping I would make the relay, and I knew I was going to do the marathon just because it was at the end of the games. And, you know, for those of you that are listening, like, how do you do an 800 and a marathon? Like, you got to think more bike racing. We do get a thing drafting, and it's just a different, it's different than running. If you're a middle distance runner and you've done some marathoning in other seasons, you can pull it off. But really the only races I went there to do were the 8 and the 15. And so I dreamed about, visualized those races for 4 years.
I'm sure. And I'm sure Marty was helping to curate that visualization as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was just part of what we journaled. We kept journals. That's what we worked on, different things we needed to. We would train behind these hand bikes, and they basically put this wooden box up so we could do like motor pacing on the track. We also did motor pacing on the road.
So motor pacing, explain what motor pacing is.
So we had a hand bike, and that Marty would ride, which has gears so it can go faster than a racing chair.
Describe what the difference is between a racing chair and just for the people out there.
So in a racing chair is like playing the piano. It's all about form and technique. And, you know, people think, oh, you just have to be strong. No, you don't have to be, you have to be strong, but you got to be flexible. But more importantly, you have to have really clean technique. So like swimming is maybe a better example people could relate to.
And what do you mean by clean technique? Like clean on the ring, off the ring, and it's just one ring, right?
Your stroke, it's one ring, but it's not like we're grabbing it with our hands. We're actually almost like punching it. So when you make contact with the ring, with your hand is coming in, you can't get caught on it, because some people will catch and it's actually stopping the wheel. So
it's like a tangential blow, really.
It really is, but then it can't be a bounce off blow. It's got to go. You
follow up and around, right? Exactly. Yeah.
You got to apply force for the full amount of distance on the ring you can get, while then getting into your next, while keeping your stroke frequency up. So on a bike, you don't have to do any of that.
Bike has regular gears, and you can be in 10th gear or whatever, right? 20th gear.
You're basically just like anybody else. You're pedaling, so you're not having to worry about the pedals spinning and you're catching it each time it comes around. You're holding on, so it's much more efficient to apply power to a bike. And there's zero, I'm not gonna say there's zero technique, but it's 90% less. Like, I get anybody listening to this could get on a hand bike and go really fast day one. Right. Racing chair, no way. It takes some people many years to really get their technique dialed in, and the form of how they're going to develop a very efficient stroke and powerful stroke.
So the difference is, it really is the difference between running and cycling, where being in a racing wheelchair, you only have one gear. You have that one push ring. So it's the same on the flat, going up the hill, going down the hill, whatever it is, whereas on a bike, you can change gears. And so you have that mechanical advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So the reason we would motor pace, there's 2 reasons. One is when you're training, people want to go out and they want to do big miles. What I think the most important thing with training is that, so if you think of training like a 1 to 5 zone, most people are training in that 2 to 3 zone, but they're not training in that 4.5 to 5 zone. And so when you can pace behind a vehicle, be it a bike, hand bike, or a bicycle, and there's a fairing up there that's breaking the wind, you're getting sucked into the draft. So now you're getting to practice your stroke at speed at the end of an 800 that you're in a training session. And it's not just you out there, because if I'm out there alone, I'm getting tired. The wind resistance is slowing me down. The track's slowing me. So I'm not able to train at 20 miles an hour. If I'm out there alone, I can only train at 18 and a half. So that pacing allowed us to just practice and finish those races at a much, those training sessions at a much higher speed.
And you're getting used to being at that speed. Your arms are moving at that speed, and
you're doing it in a turn, but you're also having to negotiate this other thing in front of you. So from an awareness of, like, it's no good if you're just out there alone, because in a big race like that, there's 8 people around you. There's a lane on the inside. Like, there's so many more factors. So we were able to simulate world-class competition on our track without all those world-class athletes. And
so you could go like world record paces.
Oh yeah. We did. Now, of course, you're like, well, I did it with, like a pace vehicle in front of me.
But you did it.
We did it. Yeah. And that's a big difference. And obviously it's also teaching your muscle memory how to go fast when you're dying at the end of an 800. And so then mentally and psychologically, you're just going through these thresholds and barriers that it's very hard to just visualize that. You actually have to visualize it and do it.
And the timing and going into the turn and maintaining your form in the turn at a speed that you've never done before. All of a sudden the chair wants to tip up on 2 wheels, and
we would have a bike, the hand bike in the front, and a person on a standard bicycle, an able-bodied person, pinching us in, right? Like forcing us into the rail. And then we would have people that would only do the first or the last lap of the race, bumping you from the back in the turn. That's pretty, you raced. You don't get that. Like, that's hard. You've got to spend some time and energy to create that type of a simulation, which I loved. Because years later, I went on and was a coach, and it was so much fun with our youth team to just go in there and just be ramming them and bumping them, and and then they're all getting out of their head. Whoa, what are you doing? I'm like, this is racing. This is racing.
What it's like for real.
Yeah, this is for real. And if you can do this here, this is going to be a joke when it happens in one of your big races for your season.
So did that race, that 800 in 1992 in Barcelona, was that sort of your version of a perfect race, like taking it door to door, proving that you were the most fit guy, that people couldn't get past you? Or
yeah, it was a breakout race for me. And it's the bar for me about what I even thought I was capable of doing. And I loved it because it was like pushing all your chip on the table. And I went all in, and it worked. It doesn't always.
Is that your version of a perfect race, though, to push all your chips in the middle?
Oh, no, I'd pushed them in a bunch of times, but I hadn't done all the rest of the work, and I didn't have the experience. I guess. Yeah, I've gone broke a few times over the years, but it was where the other pieces were present, so that I didn't win the gold medal, set the world record in an epic stadium. So that's all right down to like all of it, like just all of it. You know how it was there. Like they
I actually wasn't there. That was before. Yeah, no, I wasn't there.
They just, I to this day, I think it was the best games I went to. I mean, they came out with wreaths of flowers and, dignitaries presenting awards and, beautiful, just all
the pomp and circumstance of it.
The circumstance of it was just hard to, and then like we would leave the stadium and there's like hundreds of kids waiting for autographs and, people coming to watch us train, or just because we had a practice track as well. And like anywhere you went, you would have thought, you remember the Beatles. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely absurd. And it's Barcelona. I mean, come on. I love that time. It was perfect in so many ways. So it's to this day every day is a perfect day. It's easy to say that, they are. But that one really still is crystal clear in my mind.
Now, it was not always like that for you, though. You had to fight your way to get into that. I mean, so you had your accident when you were 14, got hit by a van on your way to swim practice, right? And And I actually read, and a lot of people would would say that this couldn't have been true, but your father had told you that the road was dangerous and it was dangerous for you to be out there, and then you got hit by this car, and your father and mother came out, and you're like, Dad, it really is dangerous. Like in the
Well,
midst after, and I
yeah,
looked at it, I was like, I could see Scott saying that.
yeah. I don't. Uh, there were a few jokes going on, but I was in shock, Chris. So we'd have to add. Well, my dad's passed away. We'd have to check with my mom. We had grown up cycling, so my dad. That's one of the things that we did as a family. We did our first like organized long ride when I was 8, and we trained for it. It was a 178-mile ride with packs and gears, and we were on crappy bikes.
In one
And
day, 178 miles.
we did it in 3 days. So
Okay, that's still
our longest day was 82 miles.
okay.
And I mean, it was hard. It's Illinois, like wind, like you can't believe, but it was
Oh, I can
awesome.
believe it. I've seen it. I've been
Yeah,
in it. Yeah, I know it.
so, but we had done a lot of cycling, and my dad was really big on, they didn't want us out riding when we were younger on our own. And so and they didn't want us, we lived about 5 miles out of town. And when we say this was a dangerous road, like it's not like a highway, and it's not even like a county highway. It's just a road, but people were driving 50, 60 miles an hour, and
Not
they didn't
expecting
want
to
us
see
out
you.
there.
Yeah.
But my parents had agreed to let me ride that day. It was incidentally the first time they agreed to it, and the first time I did it. And I was only going to be on that road. I was going to go an extra 3 miles to get off that road to a even more remote country road. But I've ridden on that road 100 times since then. It was what it was. There were a number of factors that contributed to that. But yeah, regardless, I had bought the bike the night before. I worked for Del Monte. A lot of kids do in the summer, detasseling corn. So I was actually going to swim practice, then on to work detasseling corn all day. And then I had baseball practice later that night. But hey, I was 14. You can do anything back then. And my twin brother that day, we had a swim meet the night before. I'd set my first team record because we started swimming a little bit late compared to the kids that started at like 3. I think we started when we were 11 or something. And Sean, and so I had bought the bike the day before.
Oh no.
It was a Schwinn Super Latour 2. And Sean, my twin, he said, I was like, hey man, mom and dad said we can ride our bikes. Are you going to go? He's like, nah, man, like I'm not going to go. Like, cause the coach had said, you don't have to come to practice tomorrow if you don't want. Cause swim meet the night before, I was like, oh, I want to go. Mostly I wanted to ride my bike, Chris, right? I also wanted to
got a new bike.
Yeah. So it was used, but it was new to me. Compared to what I'd been on, that was a good bike back in the day. Schwinn Super Latour 2. And all that came together with the one person that was on the road that had been up all night working and worked all day the day before, and closed a bar down. And he had driven about 30 miles on these country roads, and that's what happened. But they heard it. They could hear it from their bedroom, because we did. Yeah, they had their windows open. We all slept with the windows open in the summer, and they knew exactly what it was. But that's how it goes. I do remember. I think my first joke, and I have confirmation on this one, was my neighbor, because it happened right in front of his house. He was there first. He also happened to be a paramedic, which was great. And so I'm looking at him, and he was one of my good friend's fathers. I go, Tom, boy, this guy get his driver's license from a Cracker Jack box? All mangled and bloody, and like, he's like, yeah, Scott, just keep laughing.
Keep laughing. We'll keep you talking here. Yeah. Don't go completely into shock. Wow. But so then your swim coach came to the hospital and asked when you were coming back to practice, right?
Yep, she did. And She did, and she did more than that. She regularly reminded me of that. At first, I had a lot of legitimate excuses because I had Harrington rods in my back, and I had one of those clamshell braces on, and I had this big recliner wheelchair, and TED hose on, and all this stuff. I was pretty gimpy. And they back then in the mid 80s, they were like, oh, you shouldn't really do anything strenuous for like a year. Well, then they dropped it back. They said 6 months. And then once they kind of green lighted me, she was there. Like the day she heard from the parents, like, so I was thinking, that'd be great for the team if you'd come back out. I was like, oh, Diane, how am I going to get in the pool? She was, I was thinking about that. And I what I thought was that we'd help you get out of your, because I couldn't do a transfer to the ground back then. Right. Like, and she's like, I was thinking we'd put out some kickboards and like for padding, and then we just help you get down. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, how am I going to get in the pool? She's like, I was just thinking we push you in. And then I'm like, but I don't think because I swam a little bit like in a rehab pool where you're just floating with the physical therapist when I was in the rehab center. But I don't think I can really swim. And she's like, well, so what I did was I took a pool buoy and I took one of my old knee braces and I cut it in half and I stitched it together, and I thought that would help get your legs up. I was like, okay. I was like, God, I'm running out of excuses. And, and you're dealing with all the horror of being a 14-year-old male in your freshman year, who's now paralyzed with these skinny little legs getting into like a Speedo. Like, that's going to be humbling. So I said, well, how am I going to get changed? Because our swim team, this is a little town, keep in mind, we used a small hotel's pool. It was only like 20 yards, right? It wasn't even full.
Oh, really?
25.
Okay. Oh, I was envisioning you in like a YMCA pool or something. Or no.
We didn't have a YMCA. No. Think rural here. So, so the locker room was downstairs with the showers. And so I said, how am I going to change or take a shower? She said, yeah, I was thinking about that. And I thought I'll go down and get 2 5-gallon buckets of water, and we'll just dump it over you and rinse you off at the edge of the pool. And then you can change your clothes in this closet over here where they keep all the pool chemicals and the filter system. I was like, okay. And so I was out of excuses and I showed up and I sucked. And I'll never forget to this day, like the very first lap I get, there's like a minute, right?
For one lap on this 20 yard
pool. And she says, great. That was like 54 seconds. That's our starting point.
That's awesome.
And it was. And then I went, it was great because I got better every day by a lot for quite a long while.
Yeah, there was a lot of fat on that bone, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I couldn't dive. We learned how to do I would dive off the diving blocks from the seated position, and I got better at that. I couldn't flip turn, so it took me 3 years. I was 17, and I finally beat somebody.
Nice.
I think it was an 8-year-old kid, Chris. Okay, so.
Hey, you take these notches in your belt.
It was his first swim meet. He had just started swimming. I think he was like 4 years younger than me, but I didn't care. Right? I was kind of like, I mean, I'm sure he's still in therapy because of that, but it was fun. But yeah, so from there, it wasn't all that easy. Swimming, getting back on the team, a lot of support. But there was nothing.
You swam
else.
the relay still, right? You were still on the relay team.
Yeah, I did the relays. I did the open races. I just was dead last every time, but I didn't care. And then meanwhile, I started swimming in disability events, and I started doing the wheelchair sports camps at the U of I and playing basketball and doing these other activities. And then freshman year, there were moments where I made some not the best decisions and hung out with my buddies that were drinking and doing other things. And, but, Diane McNeely, my swim coach, was just absolutely critical. And then the track coach who I broke my back the summer before my freshman year. So I didn't really know him, but he reached out and was like, hey, do you want to be a manager? I was like, yeah, sure. And it kind of hurt a bit to watch my twin and my friends, you know, playing football and playing basketball and running track. But I taped up the ankles and I just started going around the track because by that time I knew I wanted to race wheelchairs. And
so did you have a racing wheelchair, or were you just in your everyday chair?
I was in my everyday.
Okay.
I was in my everyday. So I started doing that, and my grandfather came forward and they found a used wheelchair in California that was about my size.
Used racer.
Used racing chair, yeah. And it was Bob Malinotti's. You remember Bob?
Oh, yeah.
And it was like $400, and we got it. You know, we stuffed foam wherever, and this is a four-wheeler with the bungee cord front end. Like, it was old school. And then I had a chair. And so for the next season, that was going into the sophomore year, I started going around. I wasn't managing then. I was just behind all the runners and going around in circles and training. And that was all great. And we had to work it out. But the challenge was the school wasn't crazy about it, even though the coach suggested it. And we were having some issues with our school system. Initially, they didn't want me to come back to the school because it was about a 92-year-old school. And then it had all these additions over the decades. And every addition that they put on, they added like 5 steps here. And so they literally had 20 different levels. So for me to go to school there, like to get into the men's locker room, I had to go through the women's locker room or go up and down 4 flights of stairs. They had to move classes around. They just didn't want to do it. Historically, if somebody had a disability in our community, needed a wheelchair, they'd send them up the road 20 miles to a different school. And my parents were like, absolutely not.
And not mainstreamed kind of thing. If somebody had a wheelchair, they wouldn't be in a mainstream school. You wanted to be mainstreamed.
Well, it was a mainstream school, but it was a totally different town because it was accessible.
Right. Now, none of your friends. Okay.
Yeah. And then the transportation, my sister's 2 grades above me, all my friends, they're like, no, this kid's pretty vulnerable right now. We're not ostracizing him to another county. It was another county away.
Yeah.
And they didn't like that. And, but they got over it. They moved some classes around. I didn't get to take some classes because they were upstairs. And then in sophomore year, I started figuring out how to go up and down stairs with people. And so then they ended up agreeing to pay.
And you had Sean too, which was probably relatively easy, right? That at least he's your twin brother. So you're like, hey, you need to help me do this.
Yeah, but we didn't have the same classes, and they had a policy. No, they had a policy that you couldn't be in the same class with your brother or sister.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, but my best friend, Brent Olinger, who was a neighbor, he and I had a lot of the same classes. So they said, but we could let Brent be your helper, and he would help me between classes, which means he and I would get out like 3 to 5 minutes early so we could go up and down the stairs without 500 kids going up and down the stairs. Right. So that's the way we did it. That way they didn't have to move every class, and it really helped. But meanwhile, there was still, my parents had said, hey, well, could you actually put a lift in? Because, that would be better. And then they didn't, it was like funding, and they didn't want to do that.
Excuses, right.
So we went to the state, had a board that reviewed those types of things. And the state told them, yeah, you're going to have to do that. And then like that. So then there's starting to be some conflict, right? And so then they came back, and the track team became a leverage point for some of these other issues.
The track team became a leverage point?
Yeah, they knew how to do the track stuff. So they came back, and they got together with the Illinois High School Sports Association, and they decided it was too dangerous for myself and for others, and that it might void their warranty on their track, which said that no wheeled vehicles could be on it. Those were the big 3. And that it wasn't a part of my education. So then we ended up going back to that same state agency. and it started disintegrating at that point on, we could, but the state agency could not tell the athletic association what to do just because of the way they structure it. So we ended up getting some advocacy help, and then we ended up filing in the courts and got an injunction. So then they worked around that injunction, and it went like that. And
so this is still on the track side, or is this on the accessibility of the school?
Track side. No, they ended up putting the lifts in.
Oh, they did. Okay.
But a couple of them, yeah. Well, one, and then maybe I think, and ultimately they figured out how to get federal funding to build an entire high school because of all this, because they sort of learned the process. So the community ended up getting a whole new multi-million-dollar high school and land out of the deal. But
you were
at that point, people were gridlocked, and so that ultimately went to federal court, and it was decided afterwards. But all along the way, there were injunctions, like they didn't want me to get on the bus to go to the track meets with the team. Again, it was dangerous to me and others. And then, we'd have to call a judge like the day of that track meet in the morning. The judge would be like, "No, you're going to do this." And so it was challenging. And then at one point, the whole track team said, because we couldn't get a hold of a judge fast enough, that the whole track team said, "Well, we're not going to go to the meet." And then
solidarity, that's awesome.
Superintendent, yeah, it was. The superintendent and principal had called up the other superintendents and say, "Hey, can you say," or however it went down, "that this guy's dangerous?" And so the last year I was there, and because what they would do was I would just race behind the race, right? And it was never an issue. But as I got better, then it was an issue for them, even though there'd never been an incident and hundreds of practices together in, at that point, probably 24 plus track meets, a couple of events. So they were just always pushing back. Like, I'd only do one event. Then they said, "Well, you have to race alone." But meanwhile, if it was a combined girls and boys meet, or if there's only one JV runner or one varsity runner, they'd combine those groups just for expediency of the meet. I mean, it's a school night, right? Like, you don't have all day. But in my case, they would only do one. I mean, it was ugly. It was ugly for a lot of years. We ended up.
So you were a sideshow at some point, right? I mean, you're running your own meet. You're just. What did that feel like? I mean, at
that point, it became an advocacy choice. I knew that. I mean, I thought about just not racing and going and working with a coach, but we recognized none of this is ever going to change in the school systems if somebody doesn't make a stand. So at that point, no student with a disability had ever pressed the issue of the right for a disabled student to participate in extracurricular sporting activities, which is different than club. It's different. Like, this is public education. The only reason we do sports is because it expands the educational to the student. And so it was like Title IX. So we basically did our version of Title X, and we knew that this was about the next kids that came. And it kind of took off from there. It was interesting. It got picked up by the New York Times, by NBC, CBS, by Chicago Tribune, Maria Shriver and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I remember flying out there to do a show with them, and Good Morning America. And so it was kind of a civil rights issue as much as my issue.
So when you went out for the track team, how did things work out? Because you were the trainer first, but then you started racing, and then you started beating people. And
first I started just going around behind everybody, and I didn't beat anybody that first year at all. But then I trained all summer. I did road races that fall, and I was working with Marty throughout the year.
And you got a racing chair, right? That's when you got.
I finally got the racing chair. That made a huge difference. And then that was, so freshman year I was the trainer and just pushing around in my everyday wheelchair. Then sophomore year, I got a $400 used chair that didn't really fit, but it was way better than the everyday chair. And then junior year, I got a racing chair from that fit me. It was an Eagle. Because I went to the junior national wheelchair events and things in the summer.
Okay.
And And so then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, okay, that's a racing chair that was fitted, not just a hand-me-down that's like 2 boot sizes in foot. So, and throughout that process, I was getting better. And I wasn't setting like I wasn't beating folks that were going to state or anything that were running, but I was starting to pass people in the races. And then I think it was senior year was the first time I beat my brother. Now, keep in mind, I was just ahead of him when we were both running, and he would beat me sometimes, but usually I kind of get it. And and he was a very good runner. He was running on the varsity team his freshman year.
Okay.
Sean was running, he ran like a 5:20 as a freshman.
That's so the mile is what you were competing in?
Yeah, we were doing the mile. Yeah, not the 1500. We were doing the mile.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did the 800.
Full laps. Right.
Yeah. And so Sean was a very good runner. He tore his knee up really bad in wrestling and still ran, and he walked on to a college cross country team, even in college. Yeah, they were like, yeah, you can come run with us.
Was that at the U of I too, or was that?
No, he went to Cornell, but the one in Iowa. Okay. There's a small private school out there our good family friends had gone to, and he could have gone to U of I. He had better grades than me. But I think was it his, and then his girlfriend was going to school near there or something. It was one of those deals. He ultimately transferred to U of I and graduated from U of I.
But you finally got him your junior year. You finally beat him.
And I was beating him. Yeah. And then I was senior year, I was beating all the guys. But when they started the issue of, then they started saying you have an unfair advantage, which it was like a separate division. I wasn't even racing. It's like saying that the varsity guy beat the junior varsity guy at a local track meet where they combined the two for expediency of the meet. I was like, something makes sense. And then they were still playing that, he's dangerous and all these things. So this all ended up in court. And the the State High School Athletic Association got behind the school, which is that's what their members are, school systems. And so, yeah, they weren't going to budge. They were, it was very akin to Title IX and I wasn't the first student to ask to get onto a sports program. This has been going on for decades. And you had mentioned, but wasn't there a 1973? That was the Equal Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which basically said they have a right to come to school, and it helped on a number of issues with students with physical and intellectual disabilities, but they didn't get into interscholastic sport or activity. So, example, this just wasn't sport. Like, they didn't want me to be on the speech team either.
Really?
Because of the transportation issue. And then, like, you go to a school, it's not accessible. It's like there's a bunch of extra work. Those girls can just go knit. We had the Equal Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which is sometimes referred to as the 504 Act, and can be referred to it like that. But
and that was back in 73. Okay.
Yeah. And then there was another version of another one along the way between then and 87, or some revisions. But what they didn't have regulations, and so you can write a law that says all girls have the right to participate in sport. Like, that's what Congress does. But then somebody has to go and write the very specific regulations. And so without the regulations, you can still be in a situation where there's a lot of inequitable opportunity for males or females, or in this case, students without disabilities and students with disabilities in sport. So we didn't have any regulations. And so, you're calling your representatives, and they're kind of like, well, you guys got to figure that out. And that's how things end up kind of in the court. Because if the institutional bodies that govern those things, the National Federation of High School Sports or the NCAA or whoever it is, if they don't say, hey, we're going to fix this, the USOC, and we're going to develop policies, procedures, budgets, we're going through all of it. If they don't, you get stuck in this in-between world where they're saying you have a right to do it, but they're not stepping up and leading the way in how to do it. And so that's where we were at. We had a law that said we had a right to be there. The judge agreed with it, but there were no regulations. So then the judges will get in there and go, no, you're going to let them do 2 events or whatever it is. But those are all stopgap measures until very defined policy, procedures, and regulations are developed. So I was at the beginning of that. So it was slow, but that's fine. That's what it takes.
And your father was involved in that too, right? With you, are you guys of a similar mentality in terms of how you're going to affect change and how you will accept no for an answer?
Yes, my dad was very, now we would say that socially aware and willing to take his free time and personal time and whatever resources he had to work on issues like that. So he was that type of man. But he always said, it's your choice. Like, if you want to do this, we will support you on this. And I was like, okay, Dad. But I had no idea. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of hours of his time and more, getting ready for depositions and doing all the things you have to do and going to these ad nauseum meetings and, calling judges on weekends and et cetera.
Paying out of pocket too, right? For a lot
of we paid all that. We did get Jenner and Block, which is a major national law firm. They ended up picking it up after like the first year and a half, and they did it pro bono. We couldn't have done it without them.
You also, you found yourself in this fight as a result of circumstance, right? I mean, it's a fight you wouldn't have chosen before, but how does that affect the way that you look at your life moving forward as well, and yourself as a representative in some ways?
When you are forced into an advocacy situation and you can, flounder your way through it, you do learn a lot about how system change works. And then you almost feel like, oh crap, like I kind of have an obligation to, because then you see it again and again. And then you sort of can easily get pulled in by others, or you want to engage in more advocacy, which I would have fallen. Both of those would be true for me. I would get roped in. But I also, when I got to U of I, they were, every student athlete had to be involved in student governance. We had to serve and participate in the Disabled Students Association. We raised money for the sports and for other groups. And so we were expected to be model student athletes. And that just didn't mean getting good grades and performing. That meant you were serving your community in the school. So by the time I got through that process, then you get more skill set, you become better at it, and then there's no shortage of things we can work on this planet. So that kind of set the stage for the next 30 years for me.
Well, it opens your perspective as well, right? I mean, it's really easy to go through life as a white male.
Yeah.
And you think that's all you've ever known. So because it's all you've ever known, that's the way it is. And suddenly you continue to be a white male, but now you're in the group that they say, okay, well, you can be part of this track meet, but you're going to run all by yourself, totally separate, and be a bit of a sideshow and be a bit of a freak, which is really ultimately what you're trying to avoid.
Right.
And it makes you a little bit more sensitive to other groups and the feeling that everybody doesn't have exactly the same opportunities. Absolutely.
People used to ask, what's it like to be paralyzed? And I said, I read a lot of philosophy after I got paralyzed, by the way. I got into the deep dives. So
as a 14-year-old, all right.
I actually started reading philosophy. I was fascinated with it. Well, I would go with my dad on the weekends to the Northern Illinois University, which was like 20 miles away. And we'd go to the library, and he would be doing research on whatever, like, he loved to read and do research. And so I'd be in there and I'm like, I don't know, see what's going on here. And yeah, so I got into it. But what I said to people when they said, what's it like to be paralyzed? I said, it's like you're on this canoe floating down the river of life as a male, in the country. And all of a sudden this hand reaches down and picks you up and sets you on the bank. You're watching
in your canoe. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're out of the canoe. You're on the bank. The rest of the people are still in the canoe. Your friends, the people you used to want to date, the stuff you wanted to do, run, dance, swim, all these things just are like floating away from you, and you're observing it. And then you're kind of looking at who else is somewhat on the bank with you. And when you have a disability, you step into one of arguably the most disenfranchised minority group in this country. It's highest rates of unemployment, the lowest levels of education, the highest rates of suicide, the lowest age of working able people being employed, and it's not pretty. You can't get a house, and stuff like this. Like, most of 95% of the housing stock in this country is totally inaccessible. Yeah, when I broke my back, like, I basically became 5/8 of a man or a human being. And that's the way our system works to this day. I mean, there was a big deal locally here because they put in all these curb cuts, and people, I'm going to the dog park with a dog, and they're like, isn't it great? You got this curb cut now. And I just kind of smile and say, yeah, it's great. Like, by the way, they just added 2 stairs to the dog park entrance, right? It's all these half measures and these well-intended, good intentions with unintended consequences, right? And the last thing that we often think about are the perspectives of those that are most disenfranchised in society. And so, yeah, you can be gay and Black and everything else you can imagine and have a disability. I was fortunate that I had a stable family, a father that had a decent career and ability to earn an income. And I had a lot of things going for me, or we wouldn't be on this call.
And education. Yeah. You had some of the opportunities. You had your grandfather buy your first racing wheelchair for you. You had the opportunities that could get you going forward. When you went to U of I, you joined a community. I mean, really probably for the first time, right? I mean, you were separate. You were the one guy in a wheelchair.
One wheeler. Yeah. Yeah.
The one wheel dude. Well, what was that like at U of I? And you talk about being part of the community there, but were you integrated, but were you separate because there were enough of you and you were spending a lot of time together? How did that work? How did that dynamic work within the university?
Yeah, I had been on 2 basketball teams, and like I said, and I had gone to summer camps and things. But the basketball team that I participated on for 3 years was the Rehab Institute of Chicago's youth basketball team, which was all inner city kids. I was the only white kid on the team. And you'd have like kids that had been on Black gangs and Hispanic gangs that were like shooting at each other, and then we're all on this team together. And
you're not part of any gang.
That was a big eye opener for me. That like when we would go on a trip, and they're like, "This is the first time I've ever left Chicago. This is the first time I've ever been on a plane. The first time I've ever been in a hotel. The first time I've ever been in a swimming pool." One guy told me after I had to go in and get him because he was drowning, and then he told me he couldn't swim. So you realize, like, wow, how are you 17-year-olds and you've never been 20 miles from home and been on a plane or a hotel, and you just realize, like, wow, I've had a lot of privileges here, like a lot.
You didn't think you really did, but you did.
Yeah, exactly. I just thought, oh, this town sucks and my parents suck. And so to go to U of I, it just went up another level. Instead of it being 12 of us on the basketball team, there were just under 400 students with disabilities. Now there's 1,000 folks on campus, so we're like one, but that was huge. And we did interact with the other athletes, and I was, and the students that are in your career path or your study path. But we did spend a lot of time around each other, and it was unbelievable because you learn so much from your immediate peers that are walking the same path you are. So it was absolutely
it's different than you're going to learn from a doctor or a therapist, or
yeah.
You're getting best practices and these kinds of things that you never would get elsewhere.
All the practical tricks of the trade people that are living it know, and they're life-saving in many ways. Like, how do you catheters? So so that was great. And
the program at U of I had been there for a long time though too, right? I mean, a relatively long time.
First program in the country and really the world, where after World War II, and they really figured out how to make antibiotics work. They could keep all these paraplegics and other predominantly men who'd been disabled in the war alive. And then they came back and they had the, you could go to college for free if you're a veteran, but there were no colleges who would accept them. So before it went to U of I, they wrote letters to something like 540 universities and colleges, turned down by all of them. But,
and just for perspective too, back in World War II, which was back when the Paralympics effectively started as well, right? With the Stoke Mandeville Games. Yeah. But 80% of paraplegics didn't live longer than 3 years.
They were dead in 3 years. Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That it's wiping them out. It's bed sores, it's infections, it's all of these things that then now there's a quality of life, and we will expect to live a relatively normal, lifespan now.
I know you know this, but when we were hurt, when I was hurt in the mid-'80s, and I guess you were a couple years behind, statistically, we were supposed to be dead by suicide 28 years post-injury.
28 years. So it's 31 for me now.
Yeah, I'm 30. This will be my 36th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what was that like being at the U of I? So you have all this history, you have being the first, you have an insular group, and you guys are motivated. Like watching you guys come to races, it was a little bit intimidating for the other people in races, because you're organized as a team, you train together as a team, you work together as a team oftentimes in these races, and you carried yourself with an air. I mean, there's part of it that you were training to be successful, and training to be successful, you knew that you were going to be successful, where a lot of other people coming to these races were hoping to be successful. And they're like, oh man, these guys have a leg up on us. No pun intended.
I mean, I don't think much physically changed for me between being a 18-year-old, my senior year. I wasn't bench pressing anymore. I wasn't any stronger. I wasn't training more, but being around other people and learning from them. And, it's sort of, you're always going to get further when you can find a way to work with others. And that's what we were doing, is we were cohesively working, supporting each other, pushing each other further. And it was a very effective way to develop athletes and to get the most you could get out of them, was that environment. So
well, you often talk about the revelation at one point where you finally could relax in the, where you could sort of settle in, and you weren't working like, just working as hard as you could, where you realized, okay, I can actually conserve energy here. And that was a huge moment for you, wasn't it?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. When you figure out the subtle ways that you can rest while you're at peak performance, and therefore you're just conserving 0.1% here and 0.5% there, you get to the end of the race, maybe you've got 1% more in the tank at the finish line. Those are those very subtle shifts that can allow you to perform. And honestly, Chris, that didn't stop. I don't think it has stopped. I mean, pretty now, maybe I'm done at 50, but even going to do Ironman and, spending 7 years on that, I was in my mid 40s and figuring out, like, I would have kicked my butt in a marathon at 45 compared to 25 because of that.
Because of the experience and being more efficient.
Being more efficient, and also just being more patient and knowing I can close that gap. I got it. You know your body so much better, because at that point, even though I had some great marathon times for a young man, I didn't have the experience in the races that weren't going my way to do things that I was able to do later on because of knowing my body better.
So in a lot of ways, you become more emotionally efficient as well.
Yeah.
You're not stressing in the pack or stressing in the moment, which burns a ton of energy.
Ton of energy. And I was doing other things like meditation and the Wim Hof breathing method, and just breaking my mental. Most people shut down at 40% of what they're capable of. Your brain's telling you, and we're hardwired to do this so that we saved a little just in case we got chased by a saber-toothed tiger and then ran into a bear, right? Like, it's not just about getting away from that saber-toothed tiger. So our brains, we've evolved to always hold back. And so as you begin to understand that and you push through that, there's a whole nother level out there that I wasn't aware of back then. And you realize how much of this really is mental, right? All things equal on the physical side.
So let's go to the mental, because I do have a bit of a question of that. You had said that when you were a really young kid that you were training effectively to be in the military. You did a lot of military training but like super stressful stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, my dad was in the military. I was born in Fort Benning, in Georgia, when he was serving the latter part of his service. And both my grandfathers have been in the military. I mean, they've been in the Civil War, and I think we fought in everything. I don't know what's going on there, but literally back to the Revolutionary War, like they got all that figured out. But my grandpa Hollonbeck, who we spent a lot of time with in the summers, like we'd go there for 4 to 6 weeks. He trained thousands. He became a trainer in World War II, getting other young men ready.
Like physical training, physical, mental training. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, when you go to basic training, he was a trainer, right? All of it, And so, yeah, we kind of had that. And then Sean and I just got a kick out of it. Yeah. We would, we would put on our little outfits and go on these forced marches. And we did these like rather elaborate BB gun wars, like where we had goggles and everything, but there would be 20 people per side. We'd fire bottle rockets at each other, and on and on. So yeah, we sort of had that whole, I don't think this was healthy, but we had guns in our hands and cowboys and Indians and all that. And then Sean, that's how he paid for med school. So he was in the National Guard starting his junior year because he was 17. So the minute he could go, I did actually try to sign up. I did. The recruiter called, and I went through the whole thing with this Marine recruiter. And so at one point, he's asking these questions. Oh, what's your fitness program? I was like, I swim, and yeah, I'm on the track team, and I Ks and half marathons. Oh, this is great. How many do? And I could do like 40.
How many what could you do?
40
pull-ups.
Yeah. And so he was just drooling. And then at one point he's like, yeah, well, do you have any physical disabilities? Oh yeah. And so like as an example, he'd been asked, like, yeah, have you guys done some shooting? So my grandfather trained us to shoot when we were very young, like the proper way you train someone. And like down to like we were sighting into it, had all those elaborate ways to sight it, and target practice, all this sort of stuff. But as you know, they won't take us, Chris. And so then in college, I thought about doing something with the CIA for a while. And then I just got more into sport and advocacy, and I was like, yeah, I'm good.
You also stressed yourself too, right? I remember you telling me that like you and Sean would try to like push each other out of the water, like when you're in the pool or something like that, like to see who could stay down the longest?
Yeah,
And
who could hold their breath the longest. We would do, I mean, at this point I would look at it and they were like, we would kind of like be doing dunking each other until somebody would pass out. And one point, and so when you get to that point, by the way, you're going into full fight or flight mode, like with the other person, because you feel like you're drowning and you are. And I remember once it was a game and we probably were 11 and I was winning that time. And I thought I got him, and I gave him one last shove, and I swam over because we're both just wiped out. All of a sudden, my mom looks over and is like, "What? Why is he not moving on the bottom of the pool?" So yeah, it was, when you have an identical twin, like you're so like it's this genetic clone. You're so evenly matched. It's not like having a brother that's a year older, right? Like you are evenly matched. So we were just constantly pushing each other to the extremes. Now, he went on and was in the military, and then he got into the special operations side of it in the Army. He's a doctor, by the way. So and then he got in with Task Force 160th and 7th Group, which is a Green Beret group. And he served 21 years, and they were at war, 18 of those. So he had a lot of deployments, but he had to do all the training. So I remember when we went to prisoner of war camp, and he would tell me all these stories. And so then we would recreate them. So one of them was they would cane these guys with bamboo. And I was like, "Oh, what was that like?" And he's like, "Well, let's try it." And like we caned each other. People are gonna be like, "This guy's crazy," but like there was just this, and part of when you do distance racing and you have to raise your pain tolerance. And so I stopped it at the point that we were both bleeding, and looking back, I'm like, that was stupid. But there was something about that, I wasn't going to quit before he did.
That's where your wife has to be the voice of reason. Like, yeah. What do you guys do? No, stop that.
Total idiots. Yeah. We still do that now. Like we'll do ice baths or we'll do breathing exercises and just like, how long can you hold your breath? Right. And we've both done over 3 minutes. And that's that Wim Hof stuff, right? Like right. Once you get it, go way longer. But yeah,
but that was part of your training. I mean, it became part of the mentality that you brought to your training too, didn't
absolutely. It? Yeah, absolutely. As another racer and mutual friend of ours, Keith Davis, used to say, like, you guys are like making an art out of suffering, and you seem to like it.
You're trying to suffer more. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, but that's part of what it is. Really, if you're going to do an 8, 1500, even a marathon, it's part of like, how far can you push yourself? And it's the same thing when you look at like the Navy SEALs, like that's a lot of what makes them as effective as they are, is that they're testing and studying the mental and physical processes involved with knowing that you've got more.
Is that something that can apply to the average person? I mean, people can say, "Oh, but he was a world-class athlete. He was one of the best in the world at what he did." Like how does that appeal to people? Is it a change in perspective, just in looking at it, thinking, "Okay, my pain is part of what's going to make me better, and I can get better at dealing with the pain."
Yeah, I can develop a stronger relationship with anything in my life. I can develop a stronger relationship with unconditional love. I can develop a stronger relationship with what are my communication patterns? How do I like to receive information? How do I like to give it? Better yet now, how do others like to receive it? So now we can be more effective at communicating. I apply high performance in my life now to when I get home from a 14-hour day where I've got a UTI, I haven't eaten, I'm wiped out, and I roll in and I see that my wife's had a challenging day, and I dig a little deeper and know that I can actually cook a meal, clean up all the dishes, sweep the floor, and do a load of laundry, jump in that bed. So, and guess what? Our relationship works a lot better when I can show up like that. And she does too, by the way. She's
right.
Always,
sure. It's not a one way. Right.
But, think about a mother of 3 children, young children, infants. I mean, these women are on 24 hours a day. They're literally the life source of this other being, and they have to do all this other stuff. So is it really that hard to figure out how to get 10% more out of my training or my work day? No. I can't imagine being on for the first 15 months or a young child through being a toddler while you have two other kids, let alone if you're a single mother that doesn't have basic security and doesn't know what, they've got a week's worth of money and food. So it's this point, it's helping me see just these amazing people all around us and how they're doing it and how that really, that's life. And, we think, isn't it great you won a medal or you ran a 120 marathon. That's great. But, I look at one of our friends who has 5 kids and has gone through divorce and alcoholism and joblessness, and not her, but the broader family. And that's a marathon. That's endurance.
That's one with no finish line.
Well, there's a finish line. I mean, the grit and the unwavering moving forward. Nobody's giving out awards to them. Right? It's just, and I think that's
how do you prepare yourself to battle like that? And how do you share that message with other people?
Like now or back then?
I don't know. You can answer it however you like. Yeah, there might be an evolution to this.
I have spent a number of years now figuring out how I can connect to source, to my life force, compassion as a human being, my ability to be of service to others, which includes figuring out how I function first, because we really can't do a whole lot when we don't take a really deep look and into our own ways of beings and our own patterns. And
you can't give much if you don't have anything to give, right?
Yeah. And it's all inside of all of us. We have played, as Shakespeare said, the world's a stage and every actor here has played every part, right? So we have, through our collective consciousness and through our ancestors and our lineage and our shared DNA, we have such a wealth of knowing and of sitting in our bodies in a relaxed way. And then wherever we go, pumping gas, going to a meeting, if I can just radiate like, this is great, and here's another amazing angel that's showing up in my life. And they might be showing up as an angel that's testing me and doing exactly what I don't want or think I don't want. And they might be super frustrating me, but that's where the juicy growth occurs, right? Like, you don't learn a lot when everything goes your way. You learn a lot when you get tested. And success guarantees fail because you're going up to a higher level. And the only way you're going to get to that higher version of yourself is the process of success and mistake and failure. So it's, for me now, it's just this magical, I just love it. It sounds crazy, but I kind of love it when stuff just doesn't go my way. Like who moved my cheese? I'm like, I hope they moved all of my cheese, right? And then sometimes I want to break and I want to have a nice, a bath or something. But and then there's this entire level of energy and excitement and enthusiasm and alchemy that like I get to step into every day, and it's magical. It's awesome.
Well, it's magical when you realize that that's
Yes.
the battle that you're fighting, right? I mean, I think that in a lot of ways we look at our lives in terms of how can I make my life more comfortable? Whereas I think some of what you're talking about is how can I find a way to master myself in the moment, in this difficult moment, and be able to perform and be able to perform at my highest, but also be able to help other people
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, and maintain a sense of perspective and the realization that I have that I can determine how I want to react
Mm-hmm.
to something, that I'm in charge of
Yeah.
what's going on. And it's really easy to lose that, and it's also easy to put barriers in front of ourselves to create the sense of resistance to who we want to be, because in a lot of ways it's kind of a scary part, right? I mean, it's kind of scary going, okay, well, this is who I am. And so this is my job going forward, is looking for more battles, moving your cheese for things being more difficult. And
Well, and it doesn't always have to be difficult, but like it's also being in that state when everything's going wonderfully. But part of having the things not go, and ultimately as we adjust our idea, our conditions, as we don't go in with all these preconceived conditions, or buy into the way that we're societally expected to be, we come in there with more fluid. It's like surfing, right? Like you're just present to what's happening on the top of the wave or getting tumbled through, underneath the wave. And then when we get tumbled under the wave, I think for me, it allows me to be in a more of a state of gratitude for when I am really comfortable and it's all going great. So I think
the
it's
full
both.
spectrum.
It's both sides of the coin. Because it's, I know there was a lot of times in my life where there was this beautiful thing happening and I just tuned into how it could have been more beautiful with this idea or story or precondition that I had, instead of just being present to the utter sheer magnificence of the moment. I kind of rambled on there, Chris, but
Okay,
you gave me a softball.
I know, exactly. It's my fault. Can we finish? Can we just wrap it up with, because we went through the whole high school thing, and you earned your way into getting access for a lot of people. I mean, you fought to get access for other people. You went to college. You proved that you could be one of the best in the world at wheelchair racing. I mean, you broke world records. You did all this stuff, but on the highest level, you were still fighting that fight, weren't you? That fight for the validation that you were fighting for back in high school.
And let's be honest, part of this wasn't for others. Part of it was maybe, if I'm doing things that others might perceive of being service to others, maybe they won't call me on my bullshit as much, right? Like it's okay if I'm late or I miss something or I'm not my word, if I'm out of integrity. But then secondly, and even harder, is, maybe I'll be lovable enough as a human being that I could love myself, right?
That you need that externally, that if other people love you enough, then it says, hey, you're okay.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. And it's a mixed bag. It's all of that, right? It's nuance. It's not like we can take a cardboard cut and just say, this is this person. I suppose in some ways, like it was serving my goals or what I thought was right, whatever that is. So yeah, I went on and did stuff with the United Nations. I went to developing nations, and we saw just, they still die within 3 years of paralysis there, as an example.
In a lot of developing nations, right?
Pretty, people coming in, and we took down like 100 wheelchairs that we collected and raised money for, and there were like 1,000 people that showed up, and they're coming in on like shopping carts with bleeding sores and these modified pieces of wood with some wheels on the bottom, and then they get to jump in your chair for 2 hours, and you just realize that we're just like this drop in this ocean, and that there's so much more that we can do and afford more people to have just a modicum of dignity and just meet their basic needs. And so then went on and did some corporate stuff, and got back into the hardcore US advocacy game. And, I did that like 6 years with the International Paralympic Committee as an athlete rep, and trying to like speak for the voices of the athletes with visual impairments and with hearing impairments in the Paralympics, and then with intellectual disabilities, and then with paralysis and quadriplegia and polio and every sport inside of track and field, which has like 7 sport throws and jumps and, on and on and on. And then I got burned out. I just was like, all right, I guess I've served enough now to be lovable. And we had a child, and I was done traveling, and I knew, and my wife about left me twice. And so then I was like, okay, I'm going local. I'm going to show up, and I need to learn how to be a father and a husband and a neighbor and a friend. I'm still working on all those. Great. And now my daughter's older, so I'm sneaking out more into community and these other areas. But it's what a beautiful thing, this chance to be alive and experience a body and go through all the experience of life. That's what's going on. That's where we're at now. So
and so just to end, so are you lovable now, and why?
I'm lovable now because I'm starting to recognize that I always was, and I just had to see it in a different way. There's some longer the journeys and experiences and learning, which I'm never going to try to quit. I'm looking at, like, my computer's sitting on a 5-book compilation. It's the life and teachings of the masters of the Far East. It was written in 1920 by a guy who went over when Nepal and Tibet were still intact, and those cultures were primarily intact. And then I got another one called Invisible Leadership, and another one, Becoming Supernatural. So like, it's like, just like, I'm still trying, but I'm lovable enough. Like, I've learned at a much higher level to accept that. And I would say that there's been a lot of spiritual development that's occurred these last 7 years. It's been just lovely.
Active evolution too, right? I mean, you've played a big part in that. I think for me, looking at that, one of the questions is, it's like, am I lovable? You look at yourself, but then, and I think we all end up doing this. For us, in some ways, it might be more profound. One of my biggest problems was looking at myself through the eyes of other people, or what I expected they would, the way that they would look at me. And there's a no-win situation there, and you're not giving any benefit to the other people as well. So it's an easy way to keep yourself down. And I think part of that evolution that you're talking about is getting to a point where hey, I don't need the external part. I need to know that the process is good, and that I'm trying to be a good person and doing my best to make that happen.
When we can let go of the shame, and when we can let go of the idea that we have to be a certain way and do certain things to also live up to others' expectations, when you're talking about the other person and how they perceive you, right? Like, I don't have to get a haircut now. Like, I don't have to show up in a way they want me to show up. I'm going to show up with love and an open heart, but this is what you get. And it may not work for everybody. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Well, this really has been wonderful. You've taken us on an amazing journey, really, of, it's a personal journey, but it's a journey of community, and a journey that continues to evolve, where you have the journey of the sports side of things. You have the journey of building up for a lot of people like yourself who don't necessarily have as big a voice as you do. And then trying to figure out how you can continue to do it without necessarily saying, I have to be on television, I have to be on a plane, I have to do this. And I think that's the human journey. And you've given us this entree into the human journey. So thank you very much for being a part of it, on living it, that's the whole idea.
That's it. Thank you for those words. And I will disagree with you on one point. I didn't do this, Chris. You did, because you've committed your life to sharing your story and helping other people share theirs. So you called me and you created all this, but I thank you for it. So.
Well, it's a mutual appreciation. That is for sure. Thank you for giving me the time. And I look forward to other people getting a chance to listen to your story. So thank you, Scott, and keep doing what you're doing, man.
We'll do
We'll
it.
see you soon. All right.
Bye, Chris.
Take care. Thanks, Scott.